Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our media availability. My name's Katrin Owen. We've got a lot of media members here, both in person and online, so I'll need you to be quite efficient with your questions, please. One plus a follow-up. I want to, as always, thank our interpreters who are here to help us, Kevin Culp and Alicia Ponciano. Just a word about masks. We have heard from some of you that the masked nature of us presenting makes it a little difficult for you to hear. We are planning to put a few more plexiglass mitigations in this space, which will enable us in time to speak with you maskless. But at the moment, we are adhering to the safety protocols and sticking with the masks temporarily. You'll hear from the mayor first, followed by Adam Laughlin. Then please, all of the questions directed to the mayor need to come first because he needs to be somewhere else, and then we can follow up with detailed questions to Adam. Thanks, everybody. We'll get started. Over to you.
I'm sorry we're a little tight. Council went a little bit long, but thank you for joining us today as we announce a significant milestone in our work to end homelessness here in Edmonton. As I mentioned last week, City Council is committed to delivering dignified accommodation for people that is better than tents and safer than a camp by the end of October. And while we're not giving everyone permanent accommodations right away, this will still take some time and further resource commitments from senior orders of government. We are in a position now to say that we will provide vulnerable Edmontonians with a warm, safe, and dignified place with embedded supports for complex health challenges and access to pathways that will ensure that they are ultimately housed permanently, ultimately have their health needs met in a more responsive and cost avoidance supporting way for the province, and ultimately help them achieve more success in terms of dealing with their addictions and mental health challenges. So this leads me to the specifics of the City of Edmonton's plan, and there are still a few details to come, but what I can tell you substantially here today is that the City will be using $8 million of the Safe Restart money to activate a City-owned facility as a low-barrier 24/7 accommodation space with day programming and meal service that will run until March of next year. It's important to be clear that we are using one-time dollars that the feds and the province gave to us in response to our sustained campaign for support for municipalities, and that Edmonton taxpayers are not directly paying for this through their property tax dollars. We are using the relief money to support vulnerable people. We're deeply concerned about the well-being of Edmontonians experiencing homelessness and the rising numbers of people sleeping rough in our city, including those living in the camps that have been so high profile. So we're planning for this accommodation to be a safe and welcoming, better alternative to the camps with low barrier and helpful experience for the people who will live there and 24/7 programming. Our goal, again, is to get everyone off the street this month in October and provide them pathways to get everyone into bridge housing and ultimately into supportive long-term housing. And we want to do this as soon as possible because it is the humane thing to do and because homelessness and social disorder is detrimental for our economic recovery. In fact, from what we're hearing increasingly from our business community is that one of the biggest risks to the resiliency of our economy, one of the biggest risks to attracting investment to our city, one of the biggest risks to getting people to come back downtown and back to White Avenue and back to Alberta Avenue and back to 124th Street to support our local businesses who are struggling so much is the social disorder we're seeing because homelessness has not been solved. But we're acting to address that today. And in addition to the temporary pandemic accommodation, our plan does include a pathway to housing. And so we're working to put more bridge housing online. There'll be 688,000 that actually comes from some resources the Federation of Canadian Municipalities was able to secure in partnership with the Canadian Medical Association, who set up a fund to support vulnerable people in Canadian cities. And another housing initiative that will be pursued will be, of course, deploying the $1 billion that the federal government has provided to municipalities, which will not build all of the units that we need across this country, but it will get us some way towards meeting the need. And mayors are going to continue to advocate for additional resources from the federal government soon to follow when we use up this $1 billion, which I do not think is going to take very long. I would note that we're in active conversations with more than 24 hotel owners in town here about options to lease or purchase. So it is a very competitive space with a lot of owners who are facing huge challenges in their businesses, but also incredibly compassionate about the opportunity to make a step change in justice, conditions on the street, and cost avoidance for senior orders of government. Many of the business leaders we're talking to really understand the logic of what the city has been asking for more than a decade in our work to end homelessness. And again, it's really encouraging to have these hoteliers and some other organizations who have properties that might be suitable for this on an interim or permanent basis come forward to the city. So we've seen just a tremendous response from potential partners, both on the private sector side and also in the agency and philanthropic side, to get this done. So we do finally need the provincial government to be involved in the planning and operation of this accommodation for it to be most successful, starting with AHS, just as they were embedded at the Expo Centre. I'm optimistic that that will be straightforward to negotiate, and we would appreciate similar support to what I understand is being committed to the City of Calgary for their pandemic accommodations, which they are designing and deploying in the City of Calgary. And there's active conversations at the political level and at the administrative level about making sure the province is able to bring their services and resources to bear for this to be successful. Finally, though, for this to be successful and to get maximum leverage out of this bridge into supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness, and to get maximum leverage out of this unprecedented commitment from the federal government to buy the units to accommodate folks, we do need the provincial government to step up within their jurisdiction with interim housing and supports and long-term support commitments for those nurses, for those addictions treatment professionals, for those social workers to be embedded to make this housing successful. Again, as we have said many, many times over, this will cost them less than what they are spending today at the remand center and in our hospitals. And so having secured and working to secure a pathway out of homelessness, there really is an invitation to work together, all orders of government, to get this done. But in the interim here, we won't wait to have all those details sorted out. City of Edmonton will act to get people an option off the street before the end of this month. So Adam's got a couple more technical details. I would just add one, or do you want to go straight to questions? Then he'll...
I think we'll go directly to questions of the mayor out of consideration
Sure.
for your schedule, and then Adam will layer in some further detail. Go ahead.
I'll maybe address the obvious one, which is that we were hoping to be able to announce the specific site today, but there are just a couple of more details that need to be worked out on the paperwork to nail it down, and we should have an announcement in the next couple of days on the specific location. But the resources are in place after extensive evaluation. We just can't confirm the actual building for another couple of days. So apologies, we're hoping to have that for you today. But unanimously approved motion at council last Thursday is what released the $8 million, which allowed this plan to start to move in motion. So stay tuned for news on the particular building in the next couple days.
So questions for the mayor. Let's go to Jeremy Thompson online first. Jeremy?
Thank you for taking my question here. Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering if you can you said that $8 million was sort of freed up from a motion last week. Can you explain a bit more what actually happened there, and are you able to say how the $8 million actually breaks down between provincial money and federal dollars?
So council met last Thursday to discuss in private the plans for all of this end to end at a high level, how we were going to get people off the street and then where we were going to try to accommodate them over the next 6 months or so. But what Council needed to bless was authorizing up to $8 million so that we could go ahead and activate the shelter on the city's authority and on the city's resources. Now, again, though, those resources, that $8 million comes from the close to $160 million that the provincial and federal government worked together in answer to the call from cities and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities across the country. So out of that 160, about 60 of it's for transit, about 100 of it is to cover other challenges like purchasing PPE, some of our shortfalls in areas other than transit, but it's also eligible to be used to support vulnerable people in cities, and clearly there's an acute need in our city. The dollars can be used up to March 31st. We still have to have a conversation with senior orders of government about supports to cities for public transit and for vulnerable people and for small businesses and others and for our own operations out beyond March 31st. But we saw it, Council unanimously saw allocating $8 million out of that 160 as a good use of resources to be able to move ahead rather than wait and try to ask the province for additional resources specific to the shelter, because we really need the province to step in on the supports for the housing as the housing comes online. That's their ongoing cost and ongoing benefit in terms of demand reduction for health and justice. So we decided, we felt comfortable taking the initiative, again unanimously, to use this $8 million, which is one-time relief money from, and it's 50% federal, 50% provincial, to answer that part of your question. So I think that's why Council felt comfortable using that relief money.
We'll continue with questions for the Mayor. Jeff Labine from Post Media. Go ahead.
I know you can't give specifics about the building. Are you able to say where it's generally going to be located?
Well, that would start to give it away. I can tell you that an awful lot of different facilities have been evaluated, and we have a number of different options in place. So it's just really finalizing that the one that we think is going to work will all check out in terms of the paperwork, because we do need to work through a few details on that. I realize that's very unhelpfully vague, but I think by Wednesday, hopefully we should be in a position to confirm which building it is.
Dinesh, go ahead.
Mayor, people, a lot of speculation is underway. People are going to be worried that it might be in their neighborhood, it might be a little bit of neighborhood. How will the city address potential social disorder once this facility is up and running? And is there any concern that social disorder spilling out could then negatively impact people's perceptions on what is being done?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question, Vanessa, because there's always fear when there's a discussion, and we've seen this many times in our city, about a social service agency or supportive housing or even just affordable housing, sometimes even for seniors. And certainly, a pandemic accommodation like this at a fairly large scale, there's certainly fear, and I understand some of where that fear comes from, but I think the alternative is we leave people out on the street, we create this social disorder, we create conditions for the pandemic to run loose in the vulnerable community and overwhelm our healthcare system. So I think in this case, very clearly, now I've always been sold that the alternative was better to take people off the street. And if you have the right supports around people, the impacts are much lower than the impacts of homelessness that we see today. That said, in terms of a larger facility, you will have to put all kinds of measures in place in order to ensure that it doesn't have spillover effects into the community that are unmanageable. I don't want to say it's going to be perfect because that's not a standard we can ever meet, even though we're always held to it. But I can tell you that whatever we do here is going to be better than leaving the situation undealt with for another winter in these economic conditions with the pandemic, and where we clearly have the opportunity to do the right thing. So there may be some spillover effects. We'll do our very best to mitigate those. And I understand where the fear around that comes from, but that doesn't for a minute justify any inaction on the imperative here, which is a public health imperative and a social disorder imperative, which is these are both now threats to our community that we can act to get ahead of by taking this step.
We'll go next to Travis McEwen, CBC.
The pilot for the Coliseum Inn was brought up today as well, and also looking back at the Expo Center and how that was used. Which one of those models do you see this kind of running a little more similar to?
Great question. Actually both. So there are learnings from a combination of the Commonwealth Rec Center Extreme Cold Shelter, which was not a 24/7, but gave us a sense of how a city-supported, agency-run overnight accommodation could work on a pop-up basis. This will be longer than that. So there are learnings from there, learnings from what the day programming was, how that was successful at Expo Center, and also learnings from the really excellent work that Mustard Seed did at Kinsman. And so I think if you sort of layer all of those together and eliminate buses moving people between these different facilities, you get a much tighter program with less spillover effects to the community as well, and less cost. So I think, again, learning from a number of these different examples, we're hoping to show what a good 24/7 accommodation that's more than just a shelter where you get asked to leave, however nicely, basically at sunrise, and then have to go fend for yourself during the day. So it's not a permanent standalone unit, but it's better than a mat that you have to leave every day. So the other part of your question is about the bridge housing component at Coliseum. We're going to use the $688,000 from the Canadian Medical Association via the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to stand up a second bridge housing operation similar to what's running at Coliseum. That's a really good program. We still need permanent units to bridge people into, but we want to get a second one of those running at a location that is still being finalized as well. But this month we want to have a second hotel leased and in operation, operating as bridge housing similar. So it's both and in this case, and ultimately we'd like people who come into the pandemic accommodation to move through the bridge program into the hotels that we would buy, and other modular units that we will build in short order here to accommodate people on a more sustainable basis. Last piece of the puzzle there, again, with the federal purchase dollars, is the provincial wraparound support dollars for health and mental health and addiction supports to be embedded for people to stay housed, stay off the street, deal with this social disorder issue, and keep people healthy and safe during this pandemic.
Mr. Mayor, before you leave, we have Madison Gamau from Nate News Online, and then you will have addressed everybody who's eager to speak with you. Go ahead, Madison. Can't quite hear you yet, Madison. I see you're unmuted. Maybe try *6 if you're on a phone. I'm going to have to move on, Madison. I'm very sorry. If you are live in a moment, we might be able to catch the mayor before he leaves, but I do know he's got some pressures time-wise.
If you can hear us, Madison, feel free to email us your question. We'll do our best to get back to you. So thank you all. I'll leave you in Adam's hands on the technical side, and we'll have more to say about specific location and as soon as we can in the next couple days. And I just want to say one more thing, that Adam and the team at the city have done extraordinary work. I've put really unreasonable pressure on them over the last couple of weeks here, but they've risen to the occasion, and not alone, but with folks from a number of the agencies and shelter providers out there who work on the front lines on this, who are also exhausted after 6 or 7 months of the pandemic. So everyone's working very, very hard, and just to Adam and through Adam and to the agency partners, sincere gratitude for the heavy lifting to get us to today, and there's still a lot of work to do. So anyway, thanks, Adam.
Thank you. Further details that you have, and then we'll go to questions.
Thanks. I think a number of comments have already been made. I think maybe what I'll highlight is that the numbers of those that are in need of support during this pandemic continues to increase. We mentioned in council today that housing agencies have housed 900 people since the pandemic has started, but we continue to see an increase in the amount that are homeless, and that's as a result of approximately 180 people becoming homeless in our city each month. And so the challenge is to keep up with the pressures associated with that continuing rise, especially with the winter months coming. I think a few other things will supplement to other comments that have been made. We've talked a lot about the immediate city-led accommodation. The other parts of this three-pronged approach, and some of these have also been covered, but in a bit more detail, the use of bridge accommodations that are managed by agencies to support, again, from either the city-led 24/7 pandemic accommodations into the bridge housing or other shelters that we have in the city. And the good model referenced in the conversation was at the Coliseum Inn, and looking to build those out a bit more. Those are the mayor mentioned up to 20, half or 2 dozen hotels, motels that we're inquiring about in terms of either a license or a lease, with a license lease to purchase potentially on the basis of the next prong of this approach, which is the medium-term hope that we have in terms of the $1 billion rapid housing initiative that the federal government announced. The mayor mentioned this, that it does need operational support, and our work is to continue to engage with the province to hope that they can provide that operational support to match whatever allocation is provided to the city of Edmonton. And that's in the AHS space, that's in the community social services space, and that's in the treatment and recovery space as well, to ensure that we've got a dedicated effort to get people from either homelessness or living rough to a path for being in a house and in recovery. The other component to the federal program is that we're targeting to get all of that from a need perspective identified by the end of this year. And our understanding is that there's a desire for all of that funding to be spent by the end of 2021. So it's a pretty aggressive schedule. But as you heard today from the mayor and from the council conversation earlier, a strong commitment from council to make that happen, as well as administratively, obviously. So again, just to close, our plan with our city's most vulnerable individuals is a temporary 24/7 indoor accommodation as a result of the pandemic, with the goal of the other two phases of this approach, getting into bridge accommodation and ultimately into longer term housing. We're actively looking at how we can quickly create permanent, suitable housing options for people experiencing homelessness, and we'll continue advocating for funding from other orders of government to help those experiencing homelessness in our community. With that, happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
Another round of questions for Adam, if you're interested. Jeremy, did you have another question?
Yes, please. Hi, Adam. Thanks for taking my question here. Basically, I just wanted to be 100% clear on what the $8 million that they already have is getting you here, and you know, what you would be kind of missing out on without additional dollars from the province. Can you just sort of say that just very clearly and straightforward?
Thanks, Jeremy. So the $8 million that's been identified is to support the creation of the city-led pandemic temporary accommodation at the location to be determined, and work is actively underway to confirm that. Part of the reason for that, Jeremy, is to supplement some of the pressures that are happening within the current shelter space, in that with COVID, with the restrictions in terms of distance required, quite frankly, we're feeling pressures in terms of space. So this opens up and provides more opportunities, and part of the conversation today was also looking at an opportunity to accommodate more, especially those that are choosing to sleep rough or those that are currently in the two camps that we see in Rossdale and south of the river. In terms of the provincial support, we're really looking at, obviously there's the ongoing support that's happening to the existing shelters. That has to continue, and hopefully no doubt that will, but I think longer term, and that's the medium term and the sort of the bridge component to this three-pronged approach, is getting support from the province from a Alberta Health Services perspective, and community social services in terms of support for the agencies that would provide wraparound services at the temporary pandemic 24/7 shelter, the bridge housing, and the longer term in terms of supportive housing. Again, a big focus on treatment and recovery. So hope that answers your question, Jeremy. It's really three phases or three-pronged approach that requires actually all orders of government and agencies to really lean into this, as the mayor said.
Checking in with Madison to see if you're able to access us, Madison. Don't see any action there. We're going to go next to Vanessa in the room. Go ahead, Vanessa.
So Adam, what happens then once this temporary space is set up? Will the city be dismantling the camps?
Thanks, Vanessa. Great question. Our hope is that when this space is set up, that some of the concerns that have been raised by the folks in these camps, but also the folks that for years have chosen to sleep rough, provides them an alternative. And we saw success with that with the temporary warming shelter that we created last year at Commonwealth Stadium. And so our hope is that individuals will see the opportunity, the benefit of taking us up on these accommodations. And with that, we'll start to see a transition from these folks out of the camps and into necessary supports. The other component to that is the immediate activation of the $688,000 that came through the FCM grant for additional bridge accommodation that, again, we hope folks that are in these camps will take advantage of that. I will say that activation of this, our hope is to help that, and it's a strong encouragement to the folks that are at these camps to take us up on it. But we do want to make sure that we provide folks a warm place over the winter for accommodations, and I would suggest that the encampments right now are not that.
Jeff Levine, you have a follow-up for Adam?
Yeah, what kind of timeline are we working here, given that it could snow this month?
So the target is to have this temporary 24/7 pandemic accommodation that's city-led set up by the end of October. That's our desire, to have it activated by the end of October. And on the basis of the allocation provided by council, it could run until March of next year. So target is end of October activation. A lot of things have to fall in place for that to happen, but that's our goal, and it could run until March of next year. In terms of some of the other accommodations, the bridge accommodations, some of that has been activated previously. Council actually, I can't even remember the timeframes now, but a while ago supported bridge accommodations at the old Northland site, and that's underway. And also this FCM grant of $688,000 that can activate even more of that. And our hope for that is around the same time frame, if not sooner, for those.
Final question, please, from Travis, if you have one.
Yeah, what are we looking at for a potential capacity between the temporary housing and the bridge?
The temporary city-led 24/7 pandemic. We're still working through that, but I think order of magnitude numbers that we're looking at is anywhere from 300 to 600. And it really all depends on how much of that bridge accommodation we can activate. So yeah, those are the numbers that we're working with, and part of the rationale behind that is that current data shows that we're about 600 that are choosing to sleep rough or sleep outside, not taking advantage of the existing shelters. The other piece to this is continuing to work with the existing shelters to look at other space opportunities and support them in creating the space for those individuals to choose that. The difference with this city-led one, and the mayor mentioned this, is it's not just a sleep, but it's actually a 24/7. And I think if you can think about a person that is homeless, that has their belongings and a concern about where that goes when they're sleeping, 24/7 certainly gives you an opportunity to have more certainty around where that is and where it will be held.
Thanks, everybody. I think that covers off everyone. Really appreciate your patience as we were a little late coming to you today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.